I used to think parenting teenagers was just loud voices, slammed doors, and endless eye rolls. But looking back now, I realize it's more like trying to talk to a storm, one that's unpredictable, impatient, and sometimes downright invisible. I remember mornings where I'd repeat the same thing 5 times. Eat breakfast. Grab your bag. Don't forget your lunch. And it was like I was speaking to the air. And the question that haunted me most? Why won't they listen to anything I say? It's a question I've heard from so many parents over the years, and honestly, it's not just laziness or disrespect. Teenagers are wired differently. Their brains are still under construction, with the parts that control impulse and reason taking a backseat to emotions, risks, and peer influence. So today, I want to take you behind the scenes of that teen brain, show you why those lectures never seem to land, and share what actually works when your words seem to disappear into a black hole. By the end of this video, you'll understand the why behind the chaos and maybe even start getting through without screaming, bribing, or giving up. Because believe me, there's a way to be heard. And it starts with seeing the world through their eyes, even when it feels impossible. You see, one of the biggest mistakes we make as parents is assuming our teenagers are just being difficult on purpose, that they hear us and simply choose not to listen. I used to think that too, until I started paying closer attention to what was really going on beneath all that attitude. Imagine this. You're trying to have a calm, logical conversation about something simple, maybe curfew, maybe homework, maybe even just asking them to put their phone down for a minute. In your mind, it's straightforward, reasonable, sensible. But the moment the words leave your mouth, something shifts. Their face tightens, their tone changes, and suddenly you're not having a conversation anymore. You're in a standoff. Now here's the part most people don't realize. It's not just behavior. It's biology. A teenager's brain is still under construction. The part responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and understanding consequences, the prefrontal cortex, isn't fully developed yet. But the emotional center of the brain? Oh, that part is fully active. In fact, it's running the show most of the time. So, what does that look like in real life? It means when you say, you need to focus on your future, they're not processing future. Their brain is wired to prioritize what feels good right now. When you say, this decision could affect your life, they hear pressure, control, maybe even criticism, not wisdom. And then there's the reward system. Teenagers are highly sensitive to rewards, especially social ones. Approval from friends, fitting in, not looking uncool, those things carry more weight in their brain than your carefully thought-out advice. So even if they know you're right, their brain is pulling them in a completely different direction. I once watched a situation unfold where a parent gave a perfectly logical explanation about why their teen shouldn't go out late before an exam. It made sense, clear, calm, even supportive. And yet, the teen pushed back harder than ever. Not because the advice was wrong, but because it clashed with something their brain valued more in that moment: independence. That's the real turning point most parents miss. Teenagers aren't just trying to disobey you, they're trying to separate from you, to figure out who they are without constantly being directed. So when instructions come in strong, even if they're right, the brain interprets it as a threat to that independence. And what happens when humans feel their freedom is being threatened? They resist. Not quietly, not logically, emotionally. So the next time it feels like your teenager is ignoring you, talking back, or doing the exact opposite of what you said, understand this. You're not just dealing with attitude. You're dealing with a brain that's wired to question, push back, and sometimes completely override logic in favor of emotion and identity. And once you truly understand that, you stop taking it personally. Because this isn't just defiance. It's development. Now, once you understand that their brain is wired this way, the next thing that hits you, usually hard, is this. Even when you say the right thing, it still doesn't work. That's where most parents start to feel stuck. Because you've explained it, clearly, repeatedly, sometimes calmly, sometimes not so calmly. And yet, nothing changes. In fact, sometimes it gets worse. The more you talk, the less they seem to hear. I remember watching this pattern play out over and over again. A parent stands there, giving what they believe is a reasonable instruction: clean your room, Focus on your studies. Limit your screen time. Simple, right? But what the teenager hears isn't the instruction itself. They hear tone. They hear pressure. They hear control. And once that switch flips, the actual message? Gone. It's almost like there are two completely different conversations happening at the same time. The parent is speaking in logic, and the teenager is reacting in emotion. So while you're thinking, I'm helping you, they're feeling you're trying to control me. That disconnect is where communication breaks down. And then comes the cycle. You repeat yourself because they didn't listen the first time. They get irritated because you're repeating yourself. You raise your voice because now you're frustrated. They shut down or snap back because now it feels like an attack. And just like that, a simple request turns into a full-blown conflict. Sound familiar? There's actually a psychological explanation for this, and it's something called reactance. It's a natural human response where, the moment we feel our freedom is being limited, we push back, sometimes even doing the exact opposite of what's being asked, just to reassert control. Teenagers experience this more intensely than adults. Their need for independence is high, but their ability to regulate emotional reactions is still developing. So when they feel cornered, controlled, or constantly directed, their instinct isn't to cooperate, it's to resist. Even if they agree with you, even if they know you're right. And here's where it gets a bit uncomfortable. Sometimes, without realizing it, we make it worse. Lecturing, for example. It feels productive, you're explaining, guiding, teaching. But to a teenager, long explanations can feel like being talked at, not talked with. After a certain point, they stop processing the words entirely. You're still speaking, but mentally, they've checked out. Nagging works the same way. The first reminder might register. The fifth? It becomes background noise. By the 10th, they're not even hearing you anymore. They're just reacting to the irritation. Then there are threats and guilt. If you don't do this, or after everything I've done, those might create short-term compliance, but they quietly damage trust and increase resistance over time. So what you end up with is this frustrating reality. The harder you try to make them listen using these methods, the less effective you become. It's not because you're failing as a parent. It's because the strategy itself is clashing with how their brain is wired to respond. And once you see that clearly, something shifts. You stop asking, why won't they listen to me? And you start asking a much more powerful question. What are they actually hearing when I speak? That question right there. What are they actually hearing when I speak? That's where everything begins to change. Because once you start looking at it that way, you realize something uncomfortable but incredibly useful. It's not just about what you say, it's about how it lands. And over the years, I started noticing small shifts, tiny adjustments, that made a bigger difference than all the lectures combined. For instance, instead of walking in with, "Why haven't you done your homework yet?" Which, let's be honest, already sounds like an accusation, I saw what happened when the approach changed to something like, "What's making it hard to start your homework today?" Same issue, completely different reaction. One puts them on the defensive. The other invites them to explain. And that's the first strategy that actually works, connection before correction. Teenagers are far more likely to listen to someone who feels like they're on their side, not someone who's constantly trying to fix them. It doesn't mean you agree with everything they do. It means you take a moment to understand where they're coming from before jumping in with instructions. You'd be surprised how disarming that can be. Then there's something else most parents overlook, the power of giving choices. Now, I'm not talking about letting teenagers run the house. That's a fast track to chaos. I'm talking about structured choices. Instead of "dear chores now," it becomes, "Do you want to do it now or in 30 minutes?" It's subtle, but psychologically, it shifts everything. You're no longer forcing compliance. You're offering autonomy within boundaries. And that matters because it satisfies that deep need for independence without giving up control entirely. Another thing that quietly works? Timing. There's a moment when a teenager is receptive and a moment when they're not. Trying to have a serious conversation when they're tired, distracted, or already upset is like trying to plant seeds on concrete. Nothing sticks. But catch them at the right time, when they're relaxed, when their guard is down, and suddenly, the same words land differently. And then there's listening, real listening. Not the kind where you're nodding while mentally preparing your response. I mean actually hearing them out, even when what they're saying doesn't make sense to you. Because when teenagers feel heard, something interesting happens. They become more willing to hear you too. It's not immediate. It's not dramatic. But it builds. I remember noticing that the less I rushed to correct every little thing, the more open those conversations became. The resistance softened. The pushback didn't disappear, but it lost its intensity. And here's the part most people don't talk about. Influence with teenagers isn't loud. It's quiet. It's subtle. It's built over time in those small, seemingly insignificant interactions. So instead of trying to win every argument, the focus shifts to something more effective, keeping the door open. Making sure that even when they disagree, even when they roll their eyes or walk away, they still feel like they can come back and talk. Because that's when they actually start listening. Not when you demand it, but when they choose to. And when that shift happens, when they start choosing to listen, it doesn't come with some dramatic announcement. There's no big moment where they suddenly sit you down and say, you know what? I've decided to respect your wisdom from now on. No, it shows up quietly, in small moments. A short answer that turns into a longer conversation. A situation they would normally hide, but this time, they mention it. A decision they pause on just for a second because something you said weeks ago finally clicked. That's how you know something is working. I've seen it happen in the most ordinary situations. A teenager who used to argue about everything suddenly asks, "What do you think?" Not because they have to, but because they want to hear your perspective. Another who would shut down completely starts explaining themselves, even if it comes out clumsy, even if it's wrapped in a bit of attitude. That's progress. And it doesn't happen because the parent became stricter, louder, or more controlling. It happens because the dynamic changed. The conversations became less about winning and more about understanding. There was a case I watched unfold where, over time, the parents stopped reacting to every bit of defiance. Instead, they picked their moments. They stayed calm when it would have been easier to snap. They listened more than they spoke. And slowly, very slowly, the teenager's guard came down. One day, out of nowhere, that teen opened up about something serious. Something they had been dealing with for a while. And it was clear they didn't come forward because they were forced to. They came forward because they felt safe. That's the real goal most parents don't realize they're aiming for. Not just obedience. Trust. Because obedience might get your teenager to follow instructions when you're watching, but trust is what guides them when you're not there. It's what makes your voice echo in their decisions long after the conversation is over. And here's the truth. Teenagers are always listening, just not always in the moment. They store things. They observe. They test boundaries. And then, at some unexpected point, it all comes together. Something you said weeks or even months ago suddenly makes sense to them. It's delayed impact. Frustrating? Absolutely. But powerful. So when it feels like nothing is getting through, when it seems like your words are bouncing off walls, understand this. You're planting seeds. And not all seeds grow overnight. Some take time. And when they finally do, that's when you realize they were listening all along. So when you find yourself standing there, repeating the same thing for the 100th time, wondering if your teenager has somehow developed a selective hearing superpower, pause for a moment. Because the truth is, they're not ignoring you just to be difficult. They're navigating a stage of life where everything inside them is pushing for independence, while everything outside them, especially you, is trying to guide them. That tension? It's normal. What matters is how you respond to it. If there's one thing I've learned watching this play out over the years, it's this. The goal isn't to make them listen instantly. It's to become someone they don't tune out. And that happens when you replace constant correction with connection, when you trade long lectures for short, meaningful conversations, when you give them just enough space to feel independent, but not so much that they feel alone. You won't get it right every time. There will still be arguments, eye rolls, and moments where you wonder if anything you've ever said has landed at all. That's part of the process. But if you stay consistent, if you stay calm more often than not, if you keep that line of communication open, something shifts over time. They start to hear you. Maybe not immediately, maybe not perfectly, but enough. And sometimes that's all you need. Now I'd love to hear from you. What's one thing your teenager does that makes you feel like they're not listening at all? Drop it in the comments. I just might respond personally. And if this helped you see things a little differently, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps more parents find their way through this without losing their minds in the process.